Hi guys, I want to thank you for joining me for this special edition. I have named it Extermination. This has something that has been weighing on my conscience for a while now, and what I'm going to do is play you a 30-minute interview that was conducted on the Epoch Times, Epoch TV channel. It's called American Thought Leaders. So Edward Dowd speaks to Jan Jekielek, I believe is how you pronounce the interviewer's name, about some information that was disclosed by an actuary committee. The reason that I'm sharing this is because it goes along with some of the thoughts and ideas and hypotheses that we've had on this platform since the very beginning, which was, first of all, this is a marketing campaign. And second of all, it is a corporate means by which certain institutions will continue to see a profit. And in this particular case, it's the institution of the insurance companies, specifically insurance that is offered to people who work in corporate positions. The information that Edward Dowd shared on September 6th, and today is September 7th, 2022, by the way, and I'm sure that this particular interview will be shared far and wide and probably downloaded and mirrored all over the place. But I'm going to capture it here, and then what I want to do is ask a few basic questions about how this correlates with extermination and how the general population will have specific responses and psychological means to cope with the concept of extermination. So let me go ahead and just give you a brief overview of Edward Dowd in case you're listening and you don't know who he is. Edward Dowd started his career at HSBC as an institutional fixed income bond salesman. He learned about the capital markets, bonds, currencies, and how capital moves around the globe. He went back to business school at Indiana University wanting to get into equity portfolio management. And after graduating from there, he spent some time as a research associate in electric utilities at Donaldson, Lufkin, and Genret. This parlayed him into a job in Boston as a technology analyst on the buy side, which is managing people's money. He diagnosed the dot-com boom in the early 2000s, which opened the door for him to a 10-year career with BlackRock Portfolio Management, where he picked stocks and analyzed companies. And he was able to take the initial assets from those companies under management from $2 billion to $14 billion. So that's a quick intro to who he is so that you have an idea. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the interview that he had with Epoch Times, which, again, I don't recommend anything. I don't recommend anyone. I never recommend platforms. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here to gather information, suss it out, and then talk about how that will affect communities at large. And I'll give some specific examples about how these communities are psychologically and emotionally coping with the information that Edward Dowd shared, which is that we're currently in a sort of a genocide extermination flux based on data that's been accumulated. So let's go ahead and listen to this, and then I'll come back for just a couple of minutes and do kind of a breakdown.
Earlier this year, the CEO of a major life insurance company said death rates among working-age Americans had gone up 40% from pre-pandemic levels. A recent report by the Society of Actuaries now reinforces this alarming data.
The age cohort, which we call the millennials, experienced an 84% rise of excess mortality into the fall 2021. 84% rise represented about 61,000 Americans who perished from March of 21 to February of 2022.
To understand what's going on, I sit down with Edward Dowd, a former Wall Street analyst and BlackRock portfolio manager. who has been analyzing data from the CDC, life insurance companies, and funeral homes.
We also are seeing disability tick up tremendously. We've seen an additional 3 to 4 million Americans declare they're disabled.
Edward Dowd, such a pleasure to have you on American Thought Leaders.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you inviting me on.
Well, so you've been doing a lot of work crunching numbers over the last, well, at least year, actually, frankly, for many, many years, but specifically related to COVID, specifically related to this metric of all-cause mortality. And back in, I think it was, gosh, I can't even remember. It's at the beginning of the year. You came up with some data that was showing from, I believe it was from funeral homes. You were looking at data from insurance companies from a few different places, and you were seeing some significant changes. So why don't you tell me about what you found back then, and then we'll bring things up to present.
Sure, no problem. My journey began really in February, March of 2021, when the vaccine program was rolled out. I started hearing anecdotal stories about deaths, injuries. They were anecdotes. And being a former stock picker, portfolio manager for BlackRock, and having been on the sell side, that piqued my interest. And I'm into pattern recognition. And then the mandates came along in the summer, fall of 2021, and I started to join anti-mandate rallies on Maui. And through that, I was eventually able to meet Dr. Malone and become affiliated with him. I told him that I suspected that something possibly was going on with the vaccines. So I told him that I would investigate insurance company results, funeral home results, and that I would monitor them, and we'll see if anything, interesting or strange would happen. And sure enough, in January of 2022, we got the first inkling that something was very wrong, potentially. And that was One America CEO, Scott Davison, was on a Chamber of Commerce call, and he wasn't aware that there was a reporter, Margaret Menge from City View in Indiana, following this Chamber of Commerce. And he mentioned that in the second half of 2021, all-cause mortality among especially working age members had rose to a stunning 40%. And just to put some frame around that, a 10% increase in excess mortality for this working age group would be a once in a 200-year flood. 40% was just off the charts. And to understand why this is so significant is it was the group life business. And group life is a specific business. It's not individual policyholders. It's people that work for corporations. And I remember, and I'm sure many of you who have been employed in different corporations, when you onboard with the corporation, you sign your health care, and then you sign a death benefit that's given to you basically for free. And it's anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000 policy. And, if you're not married, you assign the beneficiary as your parents, or if you're married, it's your spouse. So when we all onboard and do these things, we never expect to collect. Well, in the second half of 2021, Scott Davison sent off the warning signal. And his company, which is a $100 billion insurance company, experienced just this incredible rise in deaths and claims. Fast forward to February, when the insurance companies start reporting, I started to see similar results from other companies. And Dr. Malone got me on Steve Bannon, Bannon's War Room, where I started to talk about this. And I said that I wanted to be a lightning rod for this issue, which meant I wanted people that had knowledge or anything to contribute to help. And one person immediately contacted me that weekend He's coming public now. He's going to come public on his own time frame. But his name's Josh Sterling. He's a former #1 ranked insurance analyst on Wall Street. Worked for Bernstein, which is a very well-known research equity shop. He was on the street for 7 years, and he agreed to help me analyze the insurance results.
So this is really fascinating, and I just want to clarify for the benefit of our viewers what 40% actually means, right?
So 40% is like a war. It's not something that happens in the normal course of business. And in 2020, when COVID was raging through the country, we saw that mostly older Americans died, mostly old. In 2021, the COVID was still going on. The vaccine rollout had occurred, but we saw a mix shift from old to young, working age people that in 2020 weren't affected by COVID to the same degree they were in the second half of 2021. And so this is just an amazing statistical anomaly that just does not happen in the normal course of business and just life.
Just in practical terms, there's this sort of baseline rate of death, right? And this is like, a 40% increase from that. That's why you're calling it a war.
To fast forward a little bit, Josh started to look at CDC data. And the CDC data, as presented on their website, was lumped all ages. And so what he was able to do was take the data, download it, and they did provide ages of the deaths. So he was able to create age cohorts. And because he has actuarial training, he created a baseline from 2015 through 2019. That's how you calculate excess deaths. So you have to have a baseline from which to compare it against. And what he found, and what I found with analyzing the data with them, was something very alarming. The age cohort from 25 to 44, which we call the millennials, experienced an 84% rise of excess mortality into the fall of 2021, August, September, October, and the rate of change was just dramatic. So they were running around 40, 50% in the summer, and then this parabolic spike move up into the fall. And it then tailed off and settled back down. But, 84% rise in excess mortality for that age cohort represented about 61,000 Americans who perished from March of 21 to February of 2022. And 61,000 deaths is the same as the Vietnam War casualties we experienced over 10 years, where 58,000 Americans died. So something happened. I mean, my opinion is that it's the vaccines. That can be debated. We can talk. I'd love to debate anybody. The problem is there doesn't seem to be any interest in debating that issue, nor am I allowed to talk about it on certain platforms. That's all we're asking for, is the ability to at least bring this tragedy to light and then discuss why it's occurring.
Before we continue, I just have a message from one of our sponsors. For all of you with retirement savings accounts, America's federal debt is now at $30 trillion, and our policies during this pandemic are causing inflation to soar to multi-decade highs. A lot of folks are rightly worried about what this will mean for their retirement savings. You can protect your life savings with the only thing that has always held value: physical gold and silver. To get started, you can call Goldco at 855-973-0470 for a free wealth protection kit. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They guarantee highest price buybacks, and they always offer free shipping. Ask how you can even get $10,000 or more in free silver. Don't wait. Call 855-973-0470. Now that's 855-973-0470. So Why don't you give me a little bit of your background, actually? Because, this is something, obviously, you're someone that's been fascinated by numbers. You've been digging into numbers. You've been using them, to predict trends on Wall Street and so forth. But give me a picture of your background and how it is that these particular data sets basically became your, fixation, I guess.
Sure. Wall Street. I'm an analyst. I started my career at HSBC. I was an institutional fixed income bond salesman, and I learned all about the capital markets, bonds, currencies, and how capital moves around the globe. Went back to business school, Indiana University, wanted to get into equity portfolio management. Graduated from there, went to Donaldson Lufkin Genret, which is it was a well-known research equity shop, investment bank. I was an electric utility analyst, and I spent 2 years there doing, the usual 80-hour work weeks as a junior analyst. Correlated that into a job up in Boston, where I became a technology analyst on what's called the buy side, managing money for other people, and did a really good job calling the dot-com top, and parlayed that into a BlackRock Portfolio Management job where I was there for 10 years picking stocks, analyzing companies, and we took our initial assets under management from $2 billion to $14 billion via good performance and acquiring share from others.
And so when you got this sort of challenge, I guess, from Dr. Malone, was the idea expressly to try to see if the mandates themselves were having some sort of impact on all-cause mortality?
No. I went in with an open mind. I had a suspicion because of the anecdotes. I'm into pattern recognition. So when you pick a stock, you don't have all the information available. So a lot of the great stock picking that occurs is people have a hunch, they see a trend, the trend isn't noticeably recognized by most everyone else, and you buy the stock and then you do more work. And as your thesis over time gets proved out, you either make a lot of money or you're wrong and you sell the stock for a loss. So let's say this was a stock. Let's say I wanted to buy this trend. I would buy the trend in January at the first signal from Scott Davison, and then I would do more work, which is what we did. And we didn't know what we would find, but what we found actually made us even more confident in our thesis.
Just recently, the Society of Actuaries published, a data set that shows very similar results. So tell me about this.
Sure, that's a great point. So we made these claims, and I get it. It's a former BlackRock portfolio manager and a former insurance analyst. We have credentials, we have bona fides, but we're two guys on the internet essentially making a claim. Okay, that's fine. I think the problem we had is that no one wanted to talk to us about it or would really allow us to get it out on other platforms. Fine, that's the state. That's the way the world is today. But then 2 weeks ago, one of my insurance insiders, who's a very senior actuary at a large insurance company who happens to think that we're correct, pointed us to the Society of Actuaries Research Institute report that was published 2 weeks ago. And they did what's called a group life survey, where they rolled up about 80% of the revenues of the industry and looked at some all-cause mortality data. She pointed me to table 5.7, which is on page 23 of this report. And this chart is pretty amazing. It almost exactly foots to our number from the CDC data. Now remember, the CDC data is just deaths. This data is claims, okay? So the claims that they saw, and they broke it down into two age groups, 25 to 34 and 35 to 44. So in the 25 to 34, they saw 78% excess mortality in the third quarter of 2021. They also saw in the 35 to 44 age group, 100% excess mortality. We combined that group, and our number was 84%. So directionally, we're right. The number we have is pretty much between the two of those numbers. And remember, what's great about this, these are two different data sets. This is we did the CDC data. This is group life claims. So now, in their report, they're not coming to the same conclusions we are, and that's understandable. I get it. They're not, actuaries are not the bravest of people, and I've talked to actuaries, and what they need more data to definitively point to what I think it is. But the ones who have discernment and, common sense are pretty much of the opinion that Josh and I are 100% right. But what we do need is we need more data from the government, which they're not providing. And if they did, the link would be there, I think, 100%.
What do they say in that report? Is there any suggestion as to where this might be coming from? Because this is, I think, cataclysm is a good word to describe 100% excess mortality in a prime working age cohort, right?
They said it's long COVID, it's increased suicides, increased drug overdoses, and missing medical screenings from the lockdowns. Now, I don't agree with that, and I'll tell you why. I know there was an event that occurred in the third quarter. That was corporate mandates and executive order mandate by the Biden administration for companies with over 100 employees. And what we saw was a rate of change, a slope of the line into the 84%, into the third quarter that was so alarmingly fast and large. It went from like 50% to 84% in 3 months. My logic is this. Not everyone decided in a 3-month period to start committing suicide, overdosing on drugs, or missing cancer screening treatments. The temporal movement in the all-cause mortality into what we call the event, the mandate event, suggests not those three things. Now, are they occurring? Sure. Are they responsible for all 61,000 deaths that we've talked about? No. I think a large percentage of those is due to something else, potentially. We can't prove it 100%, but logic and deductive reasoning would suggest this needs to be talked about, which it's not.
Well, and this is actually quite interesting because you're the field that you're in. You always have to do a lot of predictive work because indeed you're actually trying to tell people what to buy, what to sell, how to assess the market at a given point. So it kind of makes sense to me that you're thinking here.
Correct. So one thing that people need to understand is the way that Josh and I think. We're Wall Street guys. When we were on Wall Street, we competed against other smart, bright people, and we would make predictions without verification using deductive reasoning, and the news eventually would prove us right. Either in the earnings report or the trend being confirmed, what have you.
But not always, right?
Not always. We would be,
mm-hmm.
and you're wrong. You sell. But the point is this: if you wait for the news, you miss the opportunity to make money because once everyone figures it out, the opportunity's gone. So Josh and I have a saying, and there's a saying on Wall Street: be right, be early, and be loud. And that's what we're doing in this endeavor. Josh and I have never been more convinced that we're right than we are right now. And ever since February, the data that keeps rolling in has only confirmed our suspicions. And it's not good at this point.
Well, and this is the thing. The question, of course, is there something causing this? Is there any other basically idea that's been postulated, another cause that's been postulated aside from vaccine injury and lockdown effects?
Long COVID is mentioned a lot, and I've talked to a number of doctors about long COVID, which there's no clinical definition for long COVID yet, which is suspicious. I think there's a reason why they haven't really defined it. because once you define it, then other things can, other potential injuries from vaccines could be pointed to. So that it's not really being defined. Long COVID is not being defined. The other thing I'd like to say about long COVID is it wouldn't all happen in the third quarter in a 3-month time frame. And then the other point I want to make, that SOA basically took excuses that were previously made about the CDC data we discovered. And mind you, a lot of the data that we discovered did make its way around the insurance industry, because we made sure that we sent, Josh sent 100 letters to the CEOs in April and 50 state regulators talking about the CDC data we found. We invited some of them onto calls. We only had about 25 participants. So the insurance industry was aware of this, and they were aware of the counter arguments. But I'd like to use their own, if you think about what a group life policy is, okay? Group life policy is someone who's employed. They tend to not be drug users. They tend not to be super unhealthy and suicidal. So I get I could understand some of the arguments when it was just the CDC data, but this group of people employed tend to have higher health profiles, and that's why these policies were so profitable for so many years. You're going to give someone a $200,000 death benefit knowing that there's a 99% chance they're not going to die while they're employed.
Yeah, I mean, I have to comment here a little bit, because some of these, like for example, missed cancer screenings and things of that nature, like we were, very early on, we were discussing this on the show with a number of experts, and we were expecting some significant results. Although the question is, how quickly would you see those results, right? Because this cancer tends to be something that's progressive, right? Another issue, of course, the suicide, people being locked down, alone, isolated. You can imagine professionals, their suicide rate going up substantially as well, as an example. So there is some case to be made here.
Correct, but the profile of the people they give these policies to is generally healthier than the general population. I feel like they punted on trying to talk about what was causing this by using arguments that were, for the CDC data, general population. These guys are smart. They price these policies knowing that the people that they're giving these policies to are much healthier.
Okay, understood. I'm going to quote from something you posted recently on Getter. You said, just a reminder that Pfizer failed the all-cause mortality endpoint in their absurdly short 28-day trial. Well, let's focus on just what this endpoint is, and explain to me what you're trying to say there.
So what's not really well understood is that when you go and do clinical trials for new drugs, there's all sorts of endpoints you test for. And one of the biggest ones is all-cause mortality, meaning if the product, and again, it doesn't have to be scientifically proven that the death is from the product. It just has to say, statistically speaking, if the product ends up causing more death in the product group versus the placebo, then the risk-reward isn't there to justify the approval, right? So I was not aware that they had failed this endpoint until October of 2021, when a friend of mine in the biotech industry told me about a FOIA request that dropped. So I went and got it. I looked at the actual document, and sure enough, in the 28-day trial, 23% more people died in the vaccine group than the placebo group. And I asked him, I said, his name's Eric. I said, Eric, what would happen normally from your experience on Wall Street if this endpoint was missed by, say, a single product company? He said the product would not be approved and the stock would open up down 80% the next day. This is typically what happened from FDA approvals. So not only did they ignore that, they hid it from us and focused on the endpoint, which was effectiveness, which has turned out to be a lie.
Sorry, what do you mean by that? The endpoint of effectiveness being a lie?
So the endpoint they tested for, and that was in the reports when they made all the fanfare, that it was 95% effective in protecting you against getting COVID. But that's turned out to be absolutely false. People get COVID all the time who are vaccinated. So that 95% has turned out to be just a complete bald-faced lie. And that's empirically proven all over the place right now.
Yeah, I mean, they turned the endpoint into reduced illness, right?
So the endpoint originally was you're not going to get COVID nor transmit it. Then it turned into, well, you're not going to get hospitalized. That's, by the way, there's no study or data on that. That just, in my opinion, humble opinion, is a talking point, a marketing point. It's meaningless to me. So
you also have recently been looking at, or beginning to look at, some of this UK excess data, especially for young age groups. So tell me a little bit about this. You put up a chart that, frankly, is pretty stunning.
Yeah. So I've formed a new partnership with some PhD physicists in Portugal. We're starting a hedge fund, but they're also, like me, concerned about what's going on, and they use their skill set to analyze the UK data. And this was their idea. They're seeing currently excess mortality in the UK running at 10 to 20% as of today, and it had been. And what they discovered was that the age groups 1 through 14, prior to vaccine uptake, because you got to remember this age group took up the vaccines later than everybody else because the approvals came later. But what they found was that in 2020 and a large portion of 2021 before the vaccine rollouts, their excess mortality was actually going down. And why was, well, it was going down prior to this anyways, but it accelerated a little bit because the lockdowns actually, stopped activity of children moving around and that age group moving around. And you have to remember that the biggest single cause of death for this age group is accidental. And sure enough, they've shown that when the vaccines begin to roll out, the slope of the excess mortality line starts to rise for this age group. It's stunning. This is a group of individuals that doesn't typically overdose on drugs, commit suicide, or miss cancer screening treatments. So that's why I applaud them for thinking about this and looking at this data, because it in my mind, it's a smoking gun.
Well, it is a very, very stark change, and it makes perfect sense that this all-cause mortality would go down under a lockdown type regime, especially as you said that accidents are the primary cause of death, and then suddenly this again you get this mystery factor coming in.
Correct, and it started happening in late 21, and it's continuing in 2022.
And just for the record, you're not shorting Pfizer stock or anything like that, are you?
No, I made an announcement when I started this that I would not be involved in making money off of this, primarily because I knew that potentially I would be creating news, and I didn't want anybody coming after me for anything. And for me, making money off this tragedy is, it's not my idea of ethical behavior, so I'm not doing it. I'm not shorting any of these drug makers.
And the other thing that I learned from speaking with Robert Malone actually was that it's actually you and a few others who are based in Hawaii that came up with something that has come to be known as the Malone Doctrine, which I thought was a very thoughtful document, frankly.
Yes, thank you. When Dr. Malone was here, he gave a speech about, what was wrong at the FDA and these other institutions. And the idea came to us that we're not going to be able to change those institutions from the inside. We have to declare another hill. on which to fight. The hill we decided to plant our flagpole was the hill of integrity. And so the idea around this doctrine was to declare independence from institutions that lack integrity. And if you wanted us to adhere to your edicts and decisions you make for us, you have to do the following things. And if you look at the 10 points of the Malone Doctrine, one of them is, provide all the data that you're using to make your decision. Share all conflicts of interest. Do not engage in censorship of ideas. So this is just normal Americans trying to reframe the debate and say, we are independent from your decisions if you don't do the following. Now, granted, it's just a piece of paper, but pieces of paper, once implemented and spread across the world, can have power. So right now, it's got no teeth. But over time, we're hopeful that as this comes to light and institutions are raised and rebuilt, that the Malone Doctrine will be incorporated into many, many different institutions.
It just struck me as kind of the basic common sense of what you might expect from any body that's ostensibly working for the public good, right? Especially government body.
Correct. And something's happened, obviously. This corruption at the FDA, in my humble opinion, has been there forever, okay? This COVID issue has brought it to light. So the institutional, I call it the institutional imperative. And what that is that's something Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger talk about, where in corporate America, the agents of the company, the CEOs and the C-suite, run the company for their own benefit rather than for that of the shareholders, okay? And that's how a lot of fraud, greed, and corruption happens in corporate America. Well, let's talk about the institutional imperative in government agencies. Well, clearly, the FDA, over time, became beholden to pharmaceutical companies, primarily because half their budget comes from pharma in the form of fees. That's 50% of their budget, maybe more. And now it's coming to light that patents and partnerships and the revolving door, you're at the FDA for 5 years, you do some favors for them, and then you end up with this, a cushy job making, 7 figures. So this happens over time, and it becomes institutionalized. And so people that in the FDA, they're not bad people, but they see how other people succeed, and it's a slow, insidious process, and that's how institutions get corrupted. I saw it in corporate America. I saw it in some of the great frauds, Enron, WorldCom. It's just it becomes normalized. Corruption becomes normalized, and people don't see it on a daily basis, but they're in it.
And why is it called the Malone Doctrine then?
Well, because we made a bet that he was going to become a spokesperson for this freedom movement in healthcare and around the globe. And so we basically said, you're the guy with the brand, and we think you could probably promulgate this the best. And he was very touched that we gave it to him. But, it's not about the four of us who wrote it. It's about the idea of the Malone Doctrine. It's not about credit. It's about adoption. And, this was a gift to Dr. Malone, and Dr. Malone is going to make it a gift to the world. And hopefully, over time, this gets adopted.
So I understand that you're putting all this research that you've done into a book form.
That's correct. I was approached by Gavin DeBecker and Tony Lyons of Skyhorse Publishing. We wanted to examine the anecdotal evidence that seems to be growing every day of very fit, young, athletic people across this country and the globe dropping dead on the field and very close to after athletic events. And then I'm going to go into my journey and my thesis as to what may be causing that and providing what we call metadata, insurance data, CDC data, other data that points to what I think and believe is the cause, which is the vaccines.
Well, any final thoughts as we finish up, Ed?
Let me just say this. Where are we It's August 30th, 2022. And I think, you don't have to agree with my conclusions, but I think you're going to see what I'm talking about being debated more and more as time goes on, because we're seeing really, really adverse health effects starting to materialize. Excess mortality is still running at 20%, well above where it should be, with the pandemic being officially over and everyone declaring victory. We also are seeing disability tick up tremendously. We've looked at the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics disability survey, which they do monthly, and it was running around 29 to 30 million for the last 5 years prior to 2021. We've seen an additional 3 to 4 million Americans declare they're disabled. And again, this is not tied to a claim or a doctor's note. It's self-identification. It's a survey. And we think this has massive implications for the labor market, inflation. This is a crisis of epic proportions that no one seems to be talking about. At the very least, this should be acknowledged, and there should be investigations all over the country to try to figure out the silent killer. I think I know what it is, but there's not even a discussion about it.
Well, Edward Dowd, it's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate you reaching out to me.
Thank you all for joining Edward Dowd and me on this episode of American Thought Leaders. I'm your host, Jan Jekielek.
Okay, thank you for listening to that. That was about 35 minutes. Hopefully you got something out of it. What I want to do is take that information and then assimilate it into an existential question. How are we as a society coping with this idea of extermination? When it comes to extermination of people, human beings are complex and emotional and reactive and reactionary, and they may have different ways of responding to this existential threat of extermination. The data that Edward Dowd provided in that 35-minute disclosure that you just listened to, because that's what it was. It was a disclosure of data. The insurance companies aren't going to lie. They're not going to fudge numbers. They don't see a profit when they have to make payments to 40% of corporate America who have onboarded into these group life policies. They're not going to lie and say, oh, no, it's not happening. That's a lie. This is why this particular disclosure is so different from all of the other disclosures. Insurance companies don't make any money if they have to keep paying out the benefits. You understand? So when you are onboarded into the corporate culture or into a job, and you're typically between the age of, say, 25 and 35 or 40, when the onboarding process involves, going through training about your job. It involves meeting your team members. It involves NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, especially if you're working in finance or tech. And it also involves, your insurance benefits. So the company will pay for, a portion of all of your insurance costs, dental, medical, things like that. And in this particular time frame that Edward Dowd just talked about in this disclosure, he said it was during this particular time frame that insurance companies were alarmed at how many claims they had to pay for death. So we saw a spike in people dying in that particular demographic, those people that work in the corporate sector. So this is why JP and I, who come from that sector and understand the way things work and understand that, the cycle of hiring and firing individuals in the corporate sector is it matches the fiscals, the 4 quarters in the year, right? The fiscal year. So it's January. I think it's like January to March, and then April to July, and then July to October, and then October to December, and then it picks up again. So it always matches or goes along with that fiscal year, and you always have right around October 1st, you always have something called open enrollment in the corporate sector. So if you've been at your job for 9 months and October rolls around, HR will send out an internal memo to all the employees that say, hey, don't forget, open enrollment is October 1st. You can change your policy, you can upgrade it, you can take a look at it and make whatever changes you want. And that open enrollment takes place on October 1st. And I think, this is me just speculating because I'm a bit of a creative. I think that oftentimes in the world and in culture, when we have like an October surprise, it goes along with that October 1st open enrollment that insurance companies, group life insurance companies, give the corporate employees. Isn't that interesting how that always kind of matches and comes around at the same time? So what we have here is an existential crisis, but now it is no longer with this disclosure from Edward Dowd, it is no longer an hypothesis. It's no longer a speculation. It's now proof. And so my question to you out there in the community, for those few of you who do actually listen to us and pay attention and respect where we're coming from, my question to you is, how do individuals handle this existential crisis of extermination? This is, a concept that I'm getting deeper and deeper into. If you understand the basic rudimentary, characteristics of human nature, like cluster B personality, narcissistic personality disorder, scapegoating, denialism, enabling, all that stuff, then you will have a better understanding about where the world at large is headed. I've met people personally over the last couple of years, and I've witnessed them transition into, from being, traumatized and difficult emotionally because of their trauma prior to COVID, and then after COVID, as this existential crisis of extermination came down upon them, and in their subconscious, they became dead inside. They became soulless, literally. I've witnessed it personally. I've also witnessed people lose themselves in their social media connections and have lost touch with the real world, and everything that they do and experience in real life has to be shared on their social media platforms because it's where they feel that they have the best connections. So this existential crisis of extermination comes out in many forms. It comes out in the opposite of the people who live in social media, in the social media world. It's people who throw themselves into life. They suddenly have picked up traveling. They become so busy and they want to fill up their life to the very top so that it spills over, because they know existentially in their subconscious that an extermination is underway. So how are you as an individual handling this very true, very factual problem of extermination? Something that the data now proves. It's no longer a speculation. It's no longer an emotional outburst as a reaction to what's going on in the world. How are you handling that? Are you throwing yourself into your wheelhouse? Are you absorbing gathering up as much information as you can about the things that you feel that you need to share with the world? Like we have doctors, for instance, that are throwing themselves into sort of a medical freedom movement, if you will, where they are really, really feeling that it's the most important thing is to share this understanding that allopathic medicine and corporate medicine is now corrupt beyond repair, and that in order to save humanity, humanity must move out of this medical community and into something more, naturopathy, or homeopathy, things like that. So you've got doctors that have thrown themselves, their entire bodies and souls into their wheelhouse. You also have individuals, I call them influencers, that have academic backgrounds, have excellent backgrounds and pure motives, that are throwing themselves into the understanding that the rollout of ESG, which is the environmental sustainable government programs, which involved, anything from social movement organizations, surveillance, data collection, and public-private partnerships. People are throwing themselves into this wheelhouse of theirs, and they're bringing in very, very good information regarding that. Are these people throwing themselves into their wheelhouses and into the thing that they're passionate about? Are they doing that because they're incapable of addressing and even looking at this huge, monumental crisis of extermination that's upon us? And it's not their fault if they do that. It's perfectly acceptable to turn away and say, I can't handle this. This is way, way too heavy. But that is exactly what's going on. And so I think this platform here exists to bring people to these very difficult, very dark realizations that so many people are incapable emotionally or mentally of handling. For some reason, there's a few of us scattered out on the globe that can handle it. Maybe it's because I was very sick as a child, and death was kind of always sort of in the periphery of my life, and so I'm able to look at extermination or genocide square in the face and say, I get it, I know what you're doing, I know you're here, and I'm addressing it, and I'm describing it, because that's what I'm here for, is to describe what's happening in the world. Another thing about extermination is that a lot of times when we think of extermination, we think immediately what comes to mind is like your pest control killer, somebody who's got the toxin in a sort of in a backpack on their back, and they have the little hose, and they walk around your house and they exterminate the ants or they exterminate the bugs, and then those things fall down dead, like en masse, like by the hundreds or the thousands. And so a lot of people think, well, extermination means that a bomb will get dropped and 100,000 people will fall to the ground in the middle of their life. Like all of a sudden they just fall over and fall to the ground. And it's sort of this, this field of dead people, and you're looking out over a field of dead people, like a field of dead bugs or something, or like a plague or a locust plague, things like that. So something very biblical. They think of it in these sort of biblical, like huge ways in their mind. That's how we rationalize that extermination couldn't possibly happen in the real world, because we don't see evidence of this epic biblical plague-like vision before us. We don't see it, so it certainly couldn't be happening. Extermination, in my opinion, is much like the data that Edward Dowd was just talking about. It comes in ebbs and flows. So for a point, you have nobody dying, and then it creeps up to something like genocide, where you have a huge rise of people that have suddenly died, but they relegate it. The data collectors and then the media and the marketing people relegate those deaths to like a virus or something natural. And then it tapers off a bit and it goes down a bit. But then all of a sudden at some point when something big happens, like the rollout of a toxin or the rollout of a vaccine, suddenly you see a huge spike in deaths that go all the way up to 40%. and then it comes down a little bit, and then it goes back up and down, up and down. So extermination the concept of it mirrors and goes along with the rise and fall of the data sets. Another thing about extermination too that we really need to address is that there are people who say, this is my job. For instance, nurse practitioners that are deploying the toxin or the vaccine or the bioweapon into the bodies of other human beings. And they are told that it's their life duty, that it's their job, it's their honor to deploy this medicine into the bodies of human beings because they're helping kill a disease, or they're helping to create stronger immunity within the population. So you have to go back into like the way people are marketed and the systems that they've been indoctrinated into. For instance, every nurse practitioner I've ever spoken to in person, and there's been quite a lot because I have a lot of experience in the medical industrial complex and Stanford Hospital, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, UCSF, California Pacific Medical Center. Every nurse practitioner that I've ever met my entire life, having been, in and out of these institutions and and sort of been their guinea pig for everything from chemo to just, therapy, physical therapy and things like that. They've all said the same thing, that it is that they cannot imagine themselves doing anything else in life, that they were born to be a nurse, that when they were born, they grew up with this great desire to help people. They grew up with this wonderful vision that they were going to make people well, that they were going to help people. So then you get sort of this Florence Nightingale image of themselves that's kind of peppered through the population. And so they have this, grandiose idea of who they are, that they're going to save people, save the population. And with that comes all that ego. So what we're finding is that ego has attached itself as the existential crisis of extermination is rolled out upon us. And so it's very, very difficult as we try to break free of these ideas about who we are and what our role is in life. It's very, very difficult to separate that and get away from it as this very real, very data-centric proof of extermination has been presented to us. My question to you and my efforts here are to help you think and to help you help yourselves. Again, my question is, how are you personally handling the crisis, the very real crisis, the data proof crisis of extermination? And unfortunately, you can't put the genie back into the bottle. This is sort of like what they were talking about 2-3 years ago when they started to roll out the marketing term, the new normal. When you heard it everywhere, you couldn't turn on the news without hearing it. You hear it added into the scripts of various Netflix shows or TV shows that you might watch. It's normal coded wording inside the corporate sphere with their internal memos and things like that. So this is the new normal that they're talking about. It's, they want you to believe that it's normal to live in a world where extermination is part of life, is part of the living process or the life of humans. And it's not. It's just not. So how are you handling this? How are you dealing with it? How are you coping? Some people are coping in all sorts of different ways, as I mentioned earlier. And so this is where it's absolutely paramount and necessary for each individual to do the shadow work and say, how do I feel about the individuals who have rolled out extermination into my world? How do I feel about those individuals? How do I feel about myself? How can I cope? What can I do? And there is nothing, whatever you need to do to cope with this very real, data-proven rollout of extermination in society, there is nothing wrong with whatever choice you make to cope with it. If you are like, I need to get out there and live my life to the fullest and grab life by the horns and live a full, wonderful, exciting life, then do it. If you need to, cope with this very real situation by throwing yourself and immersing yourself into your wheelhouse and the things that give you passion so that you can share what's going on in the world, then do that. If you need to immerse yourself into your online friendships and make these meaningful connections that help you cope with this very real extermination that is upon us, because the numbers don't lie, then do that. There isn't a wrong answer to how you cope with extermination, because it is the absolute most, there is no words to describe what it means when a society is forced to deal with this very, very dark, dark reality that is perpetuated by the corporate class. It's perpetuated by shareholders, by the C class, by people who make these kinds of investments that somehow gain or benefit from extermination. This is, something that JP and I had talked about from the very beginning, that this was a corporate takeover. And unfortunately, in order to suss it out and in order to get to the heart of it and figure out what it is that's making this happen, it's going to take those with a corporate background to be the whistleblowers and be the translators. Or actually, we're the translators. You've got, Edward Dowd, who comes from this very, very corporate background, and a lot of things that he says may go over people's head if they've never ever worked in finance or even in the corporate world. If you've never been onboarded with a big corporation, then this entire conversation may go over your head. That's why I'm here to help translate what the corporate world is saying, translate it out to people who maybe only have academic backgrounds or, retail backgrounds, or maybe they are living on disability and they don't have any clue about what's going on in the corporate world. I'm here to translate that. I'm not talking down to anyone. This is, information that everybody, from the lowest common denominator to your highest paid CEO, needs to hear, that we are under an extermination process. And how we cope is what will help deal with it and perhaps turn it around. There's no white hats that are going to fly in and drop bombs on this, because this is it's so embedded, and it's part of the intricacies of forms and data collection and transfer of power and wealth. It's very difficult to go to one particular source and say, you're the reason that this is happening. As long as we pluck you out of this construction of this extermination, if we pluck this one person out, then it will break the gears. The whole thing will fall apart, and it'll finally stop. It's not that simple. It's going to have to be each individual doing things on an individual basis to address it and move through it and somehow survive it. So I think that is the point of this, hour-long audio today, I wanted to offer, through an empathetic tone, this information, and hopefully you all have got, some idea about how you're going to handle it. It's not a pretty, it's not pretty information. It's very dark. It's very scary. It's very sad. But that's, that's where we are. That's where we are right now. So I hope that you got something out of this. And I want to thank you for continuing to support us and listen to us and engage with us. I've made a lot of friends in this entire process. I've rejoined old friendships and old relationships that I thought were dead to me. So it's nice to have that back as a result of this entire process. So let's hope that all of the good things that are coming out of this very, very bad, dark reality of extermination, let's hope that the good things start to grow and break it all together. That's what it's going to take, is a personal journey is the only way that this is really going to be broken. And I really hope that people understand that. And I think a lot of you do. And even if you don't, I think that you'll start to look at your personal journey. Look around. Happiness is the best antidote for extermination. Extermination comes out of unhappiness. It comes out of a deep, deep despair and deep, deep anger. But if you, the little mouse that's squeaking by in this world, if you're happy, then you can break that big oppressive thing that's hanging over us. And I see a lot of happiness. Believe it or not, I see a lot of people happy. The girl that pours me a beer at my local craft brewery place is one of the happiest people I know. So it's that kind of thing where you've got simple people with complex emotions, but doing good things. Whether you are teaching someone how to take a supplement for something that bothers them, or whether you're pouring someone a beer. Simple things are where you can find true happiness. So, and I think that will break this dark, oppressive disclosure of extermination. And so, of course, I want to thank Edward Dowd. He doesn't know me, but I feel indebted because he has been saying the things that we've been saying all along. And finally, the data proves what we have been speculating, which is that this is a corporate situation that's causing the extermination. And so therefore, it's up to, unfortunately, part of the way to get out of it and part of the way to fix it is if the corporate world and the whistleblowers within the corporate construct come forward and tell the truth and be brave, and put themselves out there, that it will help the rest of the world. Sadly, I would like it if, the mothers or the mom and pop stores or all the people that are forgotten in the world could break this corporate situation, but of extermination. But unfortunately, it's going to take, it's going to have to come from that which it started. So the answer comes from the environment for which the bad stuff is rolling out. And of course, the bad stuff is extermination. Thank you again for tolerating me and supporting our work and supporting our ideas. Tune in on Friday for Friday Footnote, which is available for our patrons, our donors, and our Rockfin members.